The presentation is going to be ordered like this. At the beginning, we are going to be talking about all non-GM concept dream cars. Then we have a very noted collector here, Ralph Marino, who is going to talk about a group of Packards that he owns, concept cars as well. When Ralph gets done telling us about his experiences in the collecting world and about the importance of his cars, we will return to concept cars and we will talk about all GM concept cars. Now, I'm not here to belittle any other mark, but General Motors was the first American corporation to make first corporation in the world to make $1 billion. They just simply had a larger budget, and you see something like this from even built before the war, you can understand that they had tremendous advantages. And so to be honest, the quality of what they produced and the design cues that were used in later years in their cars, not that other makes didn't do this, but it's pretty overwhelming. So we're going to end up with the General Motors concept cars, and then there will be a question and answer period. In the past, we have taken a remote mic to the person. I'm not sure that this time we might not ask the person to come up to this mic, but I'm not sure that's been decided yet. So we will bring you up to date. Could everyone please turn off their electronic devices, including your cell phones? Okay, it's 1 o'clock. We're supposed to begin. We have a very distinguished panel today. And Tom, why don't we start with the introductions? Ralph Marino is one of the outstanding Packard collectors in the world. He began with pre-war Packards, but got very interested in post-war Packard concept cars. And later in the program, he is going to tell us about some of his cars and some other Packard concept cars. Wayne Carini, to any car person, needs no introduction. Wayne's show, Chasing Classic Cars, is the most popular car-oriented show on TV. And I don't know how Wayne finds time to do all he does, but he is the consummate car guy on the road looking for cars, restoring cars, repairing cars, auctioning cars, you name it. And he is going to help us with his encyclopedic knowledge of all cars, including concept cars today. Tony Jones is the acting president of this wonderful institution, the Kansas City Art Institute. And but Tony is a car guy. He was once the head of the Royal College of Design, which has a large section devoted to the design of the automobile. And he has kept track of his graduates over the years. So now he gets to visit the design chiefs of many major manufacturers. I don't know if it's on their dime or his, but anyway. And then we have Howard Sullivan. Howard was part of the 45-person team that restored that car over the bus over 6 years. And so when we come to the part of the GM presentation that has to do with the Futureliner, I'm sure Howard will have some wonderful insights. So anyway, why don't we get started? I think the fellows on the panel have been given their marching orders, which is to say when we show a picture of a car, I'm going to give a very basic description of it. If it's a car of interest to them and they wish to comment further, they better. But anyway, so we're ready to go, Tom? Well, we're going to start out with a very interesting car. The gentleman in the picture is Henry M. Leland, who was the founder of both Cadillac and Lincoln. This is a 1905 Cadillac. It has many of the features of a concept car in that, not because it's 8 inches taller than it is long, but because it represents something an auto executive was interested in. It represents a technology that was not widely employed, and it represents a technology that was adapted by the industry just a few years later. That technology is a fully enclosed steel-bodied car. And so I'm not saying this was the first concept car. I'm just using it as an example of what a concept car usually is. During the 30s, we had things like this. You're probably all familiar with Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome. He decided to make this. It's called a Dymaxion. As you can see, it has one wheel in the back. When it was at the Chicago World's Fair in 33, it amazed the audience by spinning donuts with that rear wheel, which had 360-degree articulation. Now, that car, he wanted to put into production, but he had a little problem with the stability of the car. In fact, when he was out driving it one day with his daughter, he managed to get it on its side. Any Dymaxion ideas, guys?
Looks like the first minivan.
Onward and up. No, we'll get to that later. Onward and upward. This is an interesting part of styling. This is obviously more from the streamline than the Art Deco. The car on the right is a Chrysler Airflow, and it had a tremendous influence on car design because it was an absolute failure, probably the worst auto introduction until the Edsel. And it was because, as you see, it ain't too good looking coming at you. And in fact, the failure of this car would influence Chrysler to be very conservative in styling for many, many years, until in the post-war a designer named Virgil Exner joined them. So this is an example of what can go wrong, but they were trying something. They were thinking about how to get air over the car, which designers have thought about ever since.
You know, that car is something that tells us a story, tells us that yesterday's failures are today's collectibilities. So, I mean, Airflows have become so collectible in the past few years. Ralph just bought one. And
yeah, I've got an Imperial Coupe. There's only 10 left, and I applied for Classic Car Club status, and now they're a full classic, so that enhanced the value of them even more. But that car is so innovative with the seat. The first car with unibody, they used to drive them off the cliff. Is this on? Yeah. They used to drive them off a cliff, and the car would still be okay. It'd be a little banged up, but it would be all one piece. So the early ones had overheating problems, but they had a little crazy grill. It looked bigger than it was, and then 35 they improved them. But that car is really, really way ahead of its time. I love to drive that car. It's just so cool.
matter of fact, at lunchtime, we were just putting a cooling fan on one just before we came here.
Guy had a 34. It was overheating. I said they called them all back for that. That car almost put Chrysler out of business.
Our next car is a Voisin. This is a French car made by an aircraft manufacturer. This, unfortunately, was introduced in the height of the Depression. It was more pricey than the highest priced Bugatti F57. And they only made, as a consequence, they only made 7 of them. However, back to Wayne's comment about yesterday's disaster is today's collectability. This particular car actually won Best of Show at Pebble Beach in 2011. But you can see a lot of airplane stuff here, and very interesting sliding roof, and also the outriggers for the front fenders, very much like an aircraft.
What's really cool about these cars, if you ever get a chance to go see Peter Mullen's collection, he's got a great number of these cars, and I believe this one is Peter Mullen's. And what's really cool is you look inside, and there's no carpeting or anything. It's just all the mechanical pieces are showing the shifting linkage and all the tunnel for the transmission. So very cool car.
Bob Gregory was a designer of Fords, and he had a great eye. Hot Rodding thanks him because he designed the classic 1932 Ford Roadster, which is the basic car that hot rodders chose to use because of its looks as much as anything. Edsel Ford, Henry's son, who was on a trip to Europe, saw, of course, all the European sports cars, and he decided that he wanted something like that. So he and Bob Gregory worked together on this car. And, of course, at the time, there was nothing like this being made by any American manufacturer. The car was later remodeled. They changed the nose quite a bit. I use this picture because I think this is kind of when it was in its purest form. But this is an example of what American designers were capable of, but the bean counters just didn't think were saleable.
And like a lot of concept cars, this is a one-off. And Bill Warner actually owned this car for quite a while, the founder of the Amelia Island Concours. It was red at the time, and it's since been painted a really great green color, which I've been trying to get a copy of that paint because I'm building a hot rod with Steve Moll right now that very similar looking to this. So I think this is one of the coolest cars they made in the era.
Yeah, I agree.
Ford has that car back now, right?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think it's a private collector. Yeah.
Private collector. This is another version of the influence of aircraft, et cetera, like the Maxion. As you can see, it's even similar in shape, but thankfully it has 4 wheels. This was undertaken by a guy who did this in 35. Continued on, actually sold some after the war. I think that, however, the total production from 35 to whenever he gave up was less than 10. So once again, it was not something that the public could accept. The Europeans were on the game as well. This is a 1936 Appia, and as you can see, they are again worried about the air over the car. They've got the fender skirts covering, although I'm not sure how effective that was considering they're louvered. But you can see this is quite a stunning car. It's obviously the European Auto Show. Chrysler, after the failure of the Airflow, got back in the game with a designer named Alex Tremulous, who would later, and we will talk about him, have a disastrous tenure at Ford. But this was obviously quite advanced for the time. Pop-up headlights. I love the little Thunderbolt on the door, and the color choices, etc. They made 6 of these. 4 of them survive. Aluminum, all aluminum, retractable top, no door handles, and LeBaron actually, which an American coach builder, one of the leading ones, did the body work. Chrysler also was willing to take another step with the Chrysler Thunderbolt. This was a dual cowl Phaeton made. They made 6 of them, and this was the Indy pace car in 1941. So they were trying to get back in the styling game, but again, none of these cars obviously ever made it into production. Ford, meanwhile, Edsel Ford and Bob Gregory continued to work together. Edsel was kind of nostalgic about the pre-Depression days when many Lincolns were bodied by famous American coach builders. You would buy your chassis, you would have the coach builder build you something to your specification. And so he decided that he would build some of these. This is a Zephyr town car. And as you can see, quite unusual, open cockpit for the driver, closed lodging for the owner. 10 of these were made, well, there were several other versions, but there were 10 very similar to this. This is actually owned by Marshall Miller, who is the chairman of the Art of the Car Concours. This car was the second one made. There is documentation that the first and the third were owned by the Ford family. Henry Ford's wife, number 1, and Henry himself, number 3. So we are assuming that this one also was owned by someone in the Ford family. When Virgil Exner came to Chrysler, he got Chrysler back in the game big time by going to Italian coach builder Ghia, G-H-I-A, who for some reason managed to corner the market practically on American dream cars who wanted a European type design. And there were several models made that were very similar to this, and you will see some of them. But as you can see, Chrysler is making great strides. These were, again, dream cars. This was not particularly intended for production.
Does that car still exist? That particular one?
I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
I've never seen it. It's a great looking car.
Ford, meanwhile, struggled. This is something called the X100. It weighed 5,900 pounds in Looks-It. However, as you can see from the turbo-type taillights, it had some styling cues that carried over to the regular Ford line. Ford didn't really quite know how to handle the whole dream car, concept car thing. This car, before they were done, cost them $2 million in 1951 money. So, but this was one of the first of the post-war Fords. Ford made a lot of dream cars, but most of them didn't get out of the clay model stage. And when I say clay model, I'm not talking full-size models, although they had plenty of those. I'm talking 3/8 scale models. They never got any further than that. This was one that they built.
Now we're talking.
Well, after the war, we had a new technology, which was jet aircraft, not for civilians yet, but obviously jet fighters and bombers from the war. And this had a huge influence on American car designers and other car designers as well. And it also started something called the Fin Wars. And what happened was that Bill Mitchell, who was, we will talk about quite a bit later, who was the head of General Motors Design, took his crew out to an air base outside of Detroit one day, and everybody was looking at stuff. And the P-38 fighter, which those of you who remember has a twin boom, twin tail configuration, and that is where the original Cadillac fins came from. And as time went on, the whole fin thing got really goofy. These are three Alfa Romeos. They're called B.A.T. For some reason, the first one was number 5, second one was number 7, and the third one was number 9. But as you can see, they are unusual. And when we see the rear view, you will see that the fins are slightly overdone, perhaps. And we'll give you a side view of the 9, which was the most. And as you can see, you have a little trouble with your rear three-quarter view there looking in your mirror. But nonetheless, needless to say, this thing packed the auto shows.
I think these are probably some of the coolest concept cars made. Bertone did a fantastic job with the bodies. You can see these cars anytime out at the Black Hawk Museum in California. We just filmed with these 3 cars out there, and it was a great to see them in person and to be able to sit in them and do a show about them. Always been one of my favorite cars and most outrageous. To see them all at Pebble Beach a few years ago was really great.
Way cool.
Very cool. I'm sorry? 1900s. They're 1900 Alphas.
This is a Mercury, 1954. The model number was XM800. Obviously, everybody was, again, the airplane influence. There were X such and such experimental aircraft, and this got appropriated by Detroit. This was actually touted as a future production model. Never got out of the concept phase, but its styling cues found their way to, you name it, from Lincoln Premier, Lincoln Capri, Mercury Montclair, Ford Crown Victoria. Designed by a guy named John Nager, who was quite talented and did several buildings for Ford in their complex in Detroit, and also did the interior of several of their private aircraft. This is a Fire Aero 2. There were 3 versions of this. There was an open 2-seater, an open 4-seater, and a coupe. And Chrysler, again, went to Ghia for these. This particular car, not this model, but the 4-seater convertible, went on to become, someone bought the rights to the design and created the dual Ghia, as it was called. he didn't get very far. He probably made less than 30. But great looking cars, a lot of attention for Chrysler, and a lot of business for Ghia.
They also became, when it was dual gear, the go-to car for most Hollywood people. I mean, it was the car to have when you were an actor in Hollywood.
Another part of the airplane influence was people thought of having turbine cars. This is a Fiat that has a turbine engine. I think it took them a long time, but they got this thing up to 300 horsepower. They never ran it. They were going to have some record runs, but for some reason, I don't know whether it was budgeting or whatever, never had it. Beautiful car, very emblematic of Italian bodywork at the time, but you can see the rear outlet for the turbine. And as I say, turbines kind of held sway as a dream car thing for a while, despite the fact that they were noisy. They had several little drawbacks, and no one ever made it with one, although Chrysler certainly came close. This is an example of Ford kind of being off the rails. This is the Atmos, which never ran. It was built, however, as a full-size model. You can get the scale from the people in the car. And I think we can say, the best we can say, is a very interesting design. But again, you see the airplane influence. And needless to say, this one didn't make it even to the point of having mechanicals installed. This is a Buono. I think it may be the only Buono, again, an Italian bodybuilder who did one for, I don't think he did another design for an American manufacturer. Do you think?
No.
And so this is kind of unusual. Now this
Very
theme,
cool car.
this theme you see here of the exhausts coming out of the fender and the rear intake echoing that design feature was common in Italian stuff for a while, and some American dream cars as well.
This was a great car. It also had a cool feature of there was a cover that came down over the radio inside, sort of like another glove box door. I first saw this car in Massachusetts in Ipswich, Mass. And boy, I'll tell you, it really made a statement, and especially the color, the orange color. Fantastic car.
This was actually created when they got it over here. Henry Ford took it over as his personal car. I don't know whether it was a bad driver or what the deal was, but he got rid of it almost immediately and sold it to the actor Errol Flynn. This is another theme that runs through collector cars, through special cars. Special cars often find their way to special people, and as you will see. This is a Hudson Italia. You can see some of the same themes on the exhaust on this. This was the result of the merger of, well, this Hudson was meant to be a production model. They actually made 26 of them. But the merger of Hudson and Nash ultimately killed this. They just couldn't find the budget because both companies were struggling. And when you put two struggling companies together, you usually get one company that struggles even harder.
One of my favorite cars, and for many different reasons. I own number 13, and it's the most original Hudson Italia in existence. It still has the original tires on it. And it's also the car that got me my television show. I pursued this car since I was 16 years old and bought it when I was 52. And because of that, a friend, Donald Osborne, wrote an article that appeared in the New York Times about that pursuit of this car. And it was called First Love. And the head of the production company that I now work for read the article on Sunday and called me Monday morning and asked me if I'd do a television show. And that's how Chasing Classic Cars got started, and all because of this Hudson Italia. So it means something very special to me and our family, and it's in our personal collection. It'll never leave. Great car.
Now you saw the Chrysler K10 by Ghia, designed by Virgil Exner. This is as you can see, a very similar theme, full wheel cutouts. This, you can get the scale of this one from the people inside. It's actually a 4-seater. And Exner wanted to get it into production, but again, the bean counter stopped it. They made a second version of this, which was much more experimental. This is the Adventurer 2. This one was not meant for production, but as you can see, again, some of the styling cues we've been talking about repeated, especially with the jet-style exhaust taillights. This thing is amazing in person. It's long and low and much more striking than it is in this picture. Don't you think, Wayne?
Yeah, it's a really cool car. Ralph, didn't Chuck Swimmer own this car at one time?
One time he did.
Yeah. Chuck had a great eye for cars, and it's a fantastic car. Like you say, it's the scale you'd think it's a smaller car, but it's actually a long, low-slung car. Great-looking car.
This is the Lincoln Futura. This was actually a project that was made off a previous Lincoln project that they only got the chassis done. And again, now we have the aircraft canopy as a theme. When you look at this car, it may look familiar, and that is because it ultimately, when they were done with it, it went to Hollywood. And it starred in the movie called Sealed with a Kiss, which had, who did it have?
Debbie Reynolds.
Debbie Reynolds and Glenn Ford, was it? Yes, Glenn Ford and Debbie Reynolds. And from the studio, it went to a TV studio where it became the first Bat car.
Yep,
And when
Batmobile.
Batmobile. And when you look at it, you can certainly see the lines, although Chuck Barris changed it around a bit. The basic lines are still there. So this car had quite an adventuresome life. Now this was actually started as a Chrysler design, which they never did anything about. And in their partnership with Ghia, when they were visiting Chrysler one time, saw the plans. And I don't know whether they asked or they took them or whatever, but they ended up taking them back to Turin and designing this baby. It's called Gilda, after the character Rita Hayworth played in a movie, because the designer thought it was as beautiful as she. But you can see the front end here. This is one of my very favorites. I think it's one of the most striking of concept cars. And I think it's rather amusing that it came from a Chrysler design, but they didn't build it first.
Turbine powered too. It actually runs on a helicopter turbine engine, so pretty cool.
Well, depending on the literature you read, I think the Italian press got kind of ahead of themselves, because they say that it was originally intended to have an Oscar 4-cylinder motor. Oscar was a small manufacturer of small displacement racing cars. But most everyone agrees today that was not so. It was designed originally to be a turbine. They never put a turbine in it, but the present owner, Scott Grenfell, has put the turbine in, and now it is a runner with a turbine. And it's a lovely installation. Wouldn't you agree on that?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Looks great. Sounds good too.
So
just don't stand in back of it.
So Chrysler got kind of inspired when they saw this thing, and they did their version, which is the Ghia Dart. And they made several versions of this. They made a couple more coupes and a couple of convertibles. But you could see it's the same basic thing and not quite as elegantly rendered. But the fins are definitely there. And in fact, it was decided when it was all over that Virgil Exner, in fact, won the fin war because General Motors decided that it was just getting too crazy and started to scale back on the fins. This is a lovely piece. It's a Nash Rambler Palm Beach. They made one. The idea was after the merger of AMC that they would do something. They had a aging sports car most people have never heard of, a Nash Healy, and they wanted to replace it and have something sporting in their line as a halo car. And this was to be the car. This was not done by Ghia. This was done by the master himself, Pininfarina. And when you see this on the field tomorrow, you will understand that this is really one of the most exquisite dream cars, I think, to come out of Italy in the period.
I agree. When I first saw this car, it really took me. It was one of the most fantastic concept cars and one-offs I've ever seen. So, and to have a Rambler on it, it just makes it all that much more special.
Now, special cars have special stories, as we've said, and this one certainly does. This is a Chrysler Norseman. Now, this car, as you can see, has some very interesting features. The fastback, a little hint of the jet out, outlets, but check out the cantilevered top and the windscreen with no A-pillars. Fascinating car. Unfortunately, we never got to see it in America because if you've ever heard of the shipwreck of the Andrea Doria, which took place, I think, off Martha's Vineyard in 1956, this went down with the boat. It was July 26, 1956, to be exact. Now, Alex Tremulous was a very famous and very talented American designer. He did the Cord 810. He did the Chrysler Thunderbolt. He did some really neat work. He went to Ford as chief designer, but was very quickly demoted and had to work under the guy who replaced him. Did not sit well with him, and he just kind of decided he would do some stuff that he'd always wanted to do. And this was one attempt. This is called the X200. What you see there is a model. When they tried it out on the public said, "My God, is this what Fords are going to look like in the future?" You can see this is 1957. It's got the hint of the Edsel grill, which is to come next year. And so this is one that never made its way past the 3/8 model stage. And it's just as god-awful from the rear view as it is from the front.
Oh, this is cool.
Yeah, this is very cool. This is a Pininfarina X, he called it. This is 1960. He was thinking of a new way to, again, get a car through the air, and he had some super ideas. Notice this is a four-door sedan. We've got our airplane tail on the back, but note the wheel stance. It's rhomboid. There's a wheel in front to steer, two wheels on the side to stabilize it, and then there's a wheel in the back which puts the power to the ground. Obviously, this has some features there's something in the business called the coefficient of friction, and this one had one that is still probably not equal today. Mark Hyman brought this weekend, and he will be on the field to tell you about it tomorrow. Fascinating car, and I think you probably have some further comments, Wayne.
Well, it's got so many design cues, the fins in the back, typical Pininfarina stuff. But what I really like about it is the rear wheel drive. It's got one single wheel in the back that pushes the car along. Really cool design. When I saw it at Bear Jackson last year, I was really tempted to buy it, but Mark kept telling me how much he was going to buy it for, and that I wasn't going to own it, that he was, and so he won. But that's okay. At least a good friend has it, and I just love it.
We've talked about Alec Tremulous. This was the end of his career at Ford. This was made to be, as you can see, the two-passenger situation with no outrigger wheels. Two wheels in the front, two wheels in the back, but together. And it was to be kept upright by gyroscopes. Okay. So this one, needless to say, did not get out of the modeling stage, and Tremulous had to turn in his badge and leave Ford. So it's just so hard to fathom how a guy who did some absolutely fabulous work had descended to this, but this is what happened.
Sort of looks like a stylized Davis Divine. I've got one of those, and one of 13 for good reason.
Chrysler made 55 of these. This is a Chrysler turbine, actual operating car. They made 55 of them in 62 to 64. These were placed with families all over the world for tryout, and obviously they were serious. Ghia did the design, and Chrysler, did the engineering over here. And fascinating story, when these traveled all over the world, as you probably are aware, a turbine can run on several types of fuel. So when they got one to France, the president of France asked if it could run on Chanel number 5. And sure as hell it could. So then they got to Mexico, and I think you know the rest of the story. Mexican president says, can it run on tequila? And it did. So a great car. Chrysler crushed 50 of them, and so 5 or so are on the loose. 2 or 3 of them run. This one, which is from the St. Louis Transportation Museum, will be on the field tomorrow. And Jay Leno has one that also runs.
I can remember back in Hartford, there was they gave one to a postman at the Hartford post office, and he drove it around. My father got to fix it once because he had dented the fender, and it was kind of a cool thing to have this in my dad's shop back in the era. The postman wanted to make sure that Chrysler had no knowledge of this, so no pictures could be taken or anything. It was very hush-hush, but it was kind of cool to be able to work on it and be with it. And actually, I don't know where the picture is, but I do have a picture of me sitting behind the wheel. Kind of a cool car. All the same color, too.
I drove this car in 1964. In the 60s, Chrysler used to have a contest throughout the high schools. They call it the Plymouth Troubleshooting Contest. And you would get a car, and there would be 2 mechanics, I and my friend, because I didn't go to college. I went to regular high school, and then in those years you went to auto shop, and you did it in your junior year, and then in your senior year you went out to work half a day, and that was your life. So, but when we were juniors, they would give you a new Chrysler, and one guy would have the fuel system and one guy would have the ignition system, and the Chrysler mechanics would come in and disrupt everything. Take the carburetor apart, put it in a bag, take the distributor apart, and you would practice all week on putting this together and see how fast you could put this car back together and getting it running. So we won that year. I'll never forget this story. I practiced all week on a Carter carburetor. I knew that carburetor in and out. We opened the hood, there's a Rochester. I didn't know what to do, but we won. We got it together. I think it took us 16 minutes to get the car running and up and going again. And then after that, they let us drive this car. So I drove that car in 1964. Pretty cool experience. And at that time, they had it running on water. Yeah, that was neat. Well, they're all that color, but I don't know where it ever went to. But maybe it's Jay's, maybe it got crushed. I don't know. But I drove that car when it was brand new. It's pretty cool.
What's really a shame is that a lot of these concept cars, and we'll go on and talk about this, especially with the GM stuff, but so many of these concept cars got destroyed. Luckily, there's a few that have been saved, like the turbines, and that good guys like Jay have them and bring them around. And this one that we're going to see tomorrow. So, but it's really a shame to think that the manufacturers would go out and actually destroy their own pieces of art.
The Italians went through their wedge stage and their scissor door stage, and this was an early version. This is an Alfa Romeo 33. The body is by Bertoni, and you can see some of the things that were coming for the Italians: a slatted rear window, the wedge shape, too much glass so you get too hot. And this had a little 2-liter V8 in the back, a very nice performing car. But it was a precursor to all the stuff that Lambo did and the other Italian supercar makers. This was an AMC designed by Dick Teague, who was the AMC designer, also a noted collector of cars in his day. I can remember going over to his house whenever I was in Detroit and slobbering over his silver Ferrari short wheelbase. There were two of these made. Vignali, Italian bodybuilder, made them, but they were never really running cars. They had plastic engines, and they were simply trucked around to the dealerships and used as a halo effect car. Great looker for the era, very clean, and Teague was very proud of this car. Actually, one of the two has been made a running model in the last few years. So one does survive.
Yeah, great looking car. I saw it at the Keels and Wheels show a few years ago. Really great looking car. Sort of looks like the Mangustas.
Yes, very much Mangusta, yeah. But before.
Yep.
The next car is a Ford Probe. This was a response to the two gas shocks of the 1970s. It's a 79 Ghia body again. Very low coefficient of drag, 0.32, I guess. And what this was a response to the gas crisis. How can we make something that will get good mileage? And so the way they approached it with this was, okay, let's have a prow nose, let's have the fender skirts, let's have the moon discs, and let's have a small motor. And so this was the beginning of the realization that, you know, we might be near peak oil, although we don't feel that way today. This is a great story. This is a Ford Mini Max. It was Lee Iacocca was at Ford. This was a concept that he pitched and never got anywhere. This was at the point where the minivan was about to be literally invented. This one was not necessarily the answer. It was smaller. But when he was fired and then Chrysler picked him up as president, he took this concept with him. Chrysler was already working on a van, but the van was, as he pointed out to them, was too big to fit in all garages. So they worked out a compromise between the Chrysler design and this, and that is how the Chrysler minivan came about. And as you know, they absolutely dominated that market for several years. So, you know, Ford may have had a better idea, but they probably should have let Iacocca do what he wanted when he was still at Ford. This is another similar solution. This is called a Brezza, which is Italian for breeze. And it was, this is another Ghia design. This car is mostly noted for the fact that it was the first car completely designed by a woman, a gal by the name of Marilena Colesi, who worked for Ghia. And as I say, this is just another example of the solutions we saw on the Probe. This was a car that the great automotive product guy, Bob Lutz, pushed at Ford. And he tells a great story about the son of a bitches. When they did the market research, they did it in supermarket parking lots. What the hell were those women supposed to know about these cars? Now, the sad thing is, this was actually on a front-wheel drive platform. Sad thing was that this thing would have preceded the Miata by 6 years. And we know there was a market there. The Italians can be as goofy as always. This is a Ferrari 512S Modulo, and you can see you can't quite figure out what they're doing here. On one hand, they have the wheels skirted. On the other hand, the top openings, the slots, they have the wheels exposed. So I think we can guess this is something to draw people into the auto shows. But it's a striking piece, and I think this is Pebble, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Anyway, just a absolutely striking piece. And with, pardon? To the right. Isn't it? No, the left. Yeah, that's where the headlamps are. Yeah, good question.
I believe this is the car too that Pininfarina's had in their private collection for years, and Jim Glickenhaus just purchased this car, and it's back in the East Coast, and they're getting it running again. So you'll see this car out at different car shows. And what's the great thing about Jim is Jim registers every one of his cars and drives every one. He does not trailer his cars to shows unless it's, of course, across the country. But local shows in the Northeast, Jim can be found driving a Lola or any type of race car on the street. So this car will be out there.
This is a Chrysler Atlantic. It draws inspiration from another couple cars we'll see in a second. But this is obviously a very well executed concept. And they really went out of their way. The cars that inspired them had straight 8 engines, and they took 2 neon engines, put them together, a common crankcase, and made a straight 8 engine for this. All the gang at Chrysler was involved in this. However, the designer himself was not a very well-known guy. The inspirations for this, according to the designer, was a Bugatti Atlantic, which is the be-all and end-all of Bugattis and maybe of Art Deco cars, and the Talbot Fagoni and Falaschi Teardrop Coupe, this is called. And I think they did a very good job of retro design, using, you can't pick 2 better influences, I don't believe, than the 2 we just saw.
And then by looking at that picture too of the Chrysler, it sort of looks like Fisker took a little bit of design cues from that car.
Finally, this is a BMW i8. This is a car that was a concept car a very short time ago, and tomorrow you will see one on the field, and if you wish, you can buy one. Fantastic car, combination of gasoline and electric power, and really perhaps the beacon of the future before we get completely off gasoline. Now we're going to have Ralph talk about his Packards. I think I mentioned at the beginning, before some of you were here, that one of the things Ralph was noted for was there was a fellow named Howard Darren, and he was a American designer. He'd been several things before that. And he kept a shop in Paris, 2 different shops in Paris before the war. And then he came back to Hollywood because he had a lot of Hollywood clientele. And this is a beautiful example of his work. It has one of the trademark signature items that he used, which is the cut down doors like an English sports car of the 30s. So Ralph, we're going to put some of your stuff up here and we want to hear about it.
Okay. This particular car here, I'm the 3rd owner. I purchased it from Bob Turnquist, who wrote the Packard story. He was Mr. Packard. And this was his next door neighbor's car, new. Originally, the car was yellow with a red roof and a red interior, which I would have done it that way, but Bob liked this green color, so he did it all green. Really, in today's, this car really shouldn't have been restored. It was really a perfect car. I've owned it, I guess, for about 12, 13 years now, and that's a 42. There's only made 15 of them. I think there's only 7 left, and I'm fortunate enough to be the only person in the world that owns one of every year Darren ever produced, because they only made 137, and I own that one. That was Clark Gable's car. So they are, and the yellow one in the background, that yellow Darren, that was Al Jolson's car. He had that made for Ruby Keeler, the actress. That's a 38. And I bought that from Darren in California on Sunset Boulevard, coached up with Rudy Stossel, who used to work for Darren, called Coachcraft. And this car was sitting in the garage. It was owned by one of the movie studios, and they had a Chevy engine in it, and they drove it off a cliff, and he got it and put it all together, and it sat there. And a friend of mine, Jerry Sauls, found the car, and he brought it back, and I ended up purchasing it from him. So it's got pretty good history, that car. This particular one is called the Packard. It's bodied by Vignale. I can't get much history on this car. I found one photo of it in a European magazine. It's on a 38 chassis, and the car was started in 1938 in Europe and Italy, and then it was hidden during the war and finished in 48. The car is all aluminum except for the front fenders, which are steel, so you can work on it. And the hood opens either side, or you can just lift it right off. It's got a 60/40 seat. It's got Fiat taillights. It's got the abstract grille. And if you can't see it in that photo, but you'll see it tomorrow on the field. Packard on the side of their cars came to a point and then back down. Well, this has that, but it's rounded. So it's got a lot of unique features. Special door handles. You pop the trunk, and the trunk has got a special spare in there. So I have one picture of it in a magazine from the 50s, and that's all I could find. A friend of mine, he went to Italy, and the Vignale family said they were writing a book on their ventures, and they weren't going to release anything. But that's all I could ever find. I own that car, I think, since 1989. This particular car is a 52 Packard. It's bodied by Henny. This car went to Canada new. It was the Canadian Embassy car because it's got air conditioning, but it also got a unique feature. It's got a sunroof, but it's in the back. This car was a business coupe. And what Henny did, they took all the senior things, senior meaning the bigger Packards, the 400s, and put all the trim on this car, the dash, the speedometer, all chrome inside, and put an electric sunroof in it, but it's in the back. And the ambassador to Canada used to stand up in parades, and that's where he would stand up in the back of the car and wave through the sunroof. And on either side of the spare used to have these treads for the guards that there would be handles, and that's where they would stand during the parades to protect them. I bought that from a family in Texas that her father was a funeral director. I had to buy that and a couple of hearses just to get this car. But it's really a really unique car. And this is the famous Packard Pan American. They made 6 of these. This is car number 5. It's got 26,000 original miles. I'm the 3rd owner. I bought it from a collector in the Midwest called Morgan Yost, who was around for many years. And he bought it from a lawyer that purchased it new. I have all the sales agreements and all, and he took him 2 years to pay the lawyer off. The paint is original. I did the chrome, I put a new interior in it, and I did the under the hood, I did the engine. But it's just and that's the only one that was made that was our Bibbs car, who was the designer, and that was the only one that was, that has a convertible top. The top will be up for the show. And that car was built, they sectioned the whole body 6 inches all the way down the sides and dropped it down. So when you sit, the body's down, but your head is high. They didn't proportion it that great. And this was the predecessor of the Packard Caribbean, because you can see the hood there with the scoop like the Caribbean had. So very, very, that's a real cool car. I like that car.
That picture was taken in Amelia, wasn't it?
Yes, my grandkids. I think you took it.
Yeah, I can see those guys.
Yeah, that's a great car. Everybody loves that color. It's the only car in the world ever painted that color. It's got 24 karat gold, and it's called green gold. And I have correspondence from Morgan with DuPont trying to get the color samples. They wouldn't release the formula to the car. So we matched it pretty good under the hood, but it's not quite as metallic as the top. This is one of the Packard Balboas. This particular car was supposed to be crushed. And the fellow, when they told him to crush it, he said, okay, drove it home, put it in his garage, and that's where it got crushed. It sat there for many years. And I get a phone call one day, and I heard about the car, and it kind of just dropped out of sight. And the guy passed away, and then there was a litigation between his family on who was going to get the car and what it was worth, and back and forth, and it sat and sat and sat and sat. So I get a phone call one day from Mike Fairborn from RM. He says, I was trying to track it, but he got there before I did, and he says, I think I can buy the car. So we worked out a price, and I bought it. The unique thing about this car, it won all kind of safety awards in '53 because of the roof. The window was supposed to be designed to drop down, but it doesn't. It doesn't drop down. And the weird story about it is the fellow that worked for Packard that designed this car was built by Mitchell Bentley Corporation. The fellow that did the joints, when he left Packard, he went to work for Lincoln Mercury, and then Lincoln Mercury used that rear window that dropped up and down in their cars. But it was Packard's design. And come to find out later, Mitchell Bentley Corporation liked this car so much that Mr. Mitchell built one for himself. And I ended up purchasing that one about, I guess, around 10 years ago from Mitchell Bentley Corporation. Now I have both of them, and they're both restored. This car here, they made 2 of. This is the Packard Monte Carlo. These cars were, two of them were built, and they went to California to Earl C. Anthony's showroom, and that's where they sat. And then they were promoted all over the country. This has the cut over your center part of the front part of the roof is cut open, and it's got the Caribbean hood. It's got the two-tone paint. It's got a special dash on one of them. And the first one that was built, which is not this one, the other one we just finished actually 2 months ago, was structurally weak because this was a hardtop. Years ago, is when you built a convertible, you X the frame, and that gave you strength. But these cars never started as a convertible or even thought to be a convertible. So when we did it, when you work on this, the whole back of the car used to come down and the doors would pop open. So we structured it and brought it all back up. But these cars were supposed to be crushed too. But I bought this one, I guess, around 6 years ago, and we did it. And then I found another one that was rusted to the door handles, and we had to go for 3 parts cars. Well, we finished that about 4 months ago. That's burgundy and maroon. So when I show them, this one will be shown with the top up because it's got all the mechanism, and the other one will be shown with the roof open. Now this is the Packard Panther. In '52, Packard made 4 of these. And this car is 3/4 of an inch fiberglass. So they said that the Corvette was the first fiberglass car, but Packard really had the first 4 fiberglass roadsters. And after the war, Packard, it was very hard to monetarily go against the big 3. And they made 4 of these in '52, and then in '54, they took this one and the other one I have, both of these, and they redesigned them. They put the cathedral taillights like the '55 Packards have, and they put dual mirrors, dual exhaust, put a scoop in the hood because they had an overheating problem with these. And this particular one is the only one made with a hardtop. And these were made by Mitchell Bentley Corporation also. This was Mr. Mitchell's car. And then when they redesigned them, Creative Industries, Mr. Ratty, drove the other one, which I have, which is all original. This car even had brown rubber tires on it to match the color of the car. I still have them. This has 6,000 miles, and the other one has, I think, 18,000 miles. The other one I own is black and white, and that's all original. That's a convertible top, and this is the only one with the hardtop. See, in '52, Packard was supposed to merge with Studebaker, Nash, Hudson. They were all supposed to be the other one, so it was going to be the big 4, but it never worked, and they just didn't have enough money, so that's why they pulled these 2 back, restyled these, and put them back on the market. This is the Packard Request. This is the only one ever made. This was the next to the last Packard concept car ever made, and the name comes from people writing into Packard requesting them to come back with the grill, the cathedral grill. So they put this in there. Those 2 front bumpers and grill weigh 1,240 pounds. It's unbelievably heavy. The hood is fiberglass, and when we did this car, we didn't realize the hood, the fenders were cut out, and the hood V's and goes wide, and that grill and hood is all one piece. So when it comes down, it's like a guillotine. So it's a pretty cool car. It really is neat. It's got special headlight buckets and special plaid taillight, plastic or glass, whatever they were. So those are unique to this car also. And the interiors, it's really a sharp car. It really runs well. A little nose heavy, but you know, that's how that one goes.
Sort of plows in the corner.
Yeah, yeah. This is the only concept car I do not own. And it's in the Studebaker Museum for perpetuity, and I don't know what perpetuity means. So, but they keep telling me it's in there forever. So I'm number 1 on the list if anything ever happens. But that's the Predictor. That's really a spaceship. That's all electric and power and sliding glass and doors and windows. That's a cool car. I try every year. I call and they go, "Oh yeah, but you ain't getting it." So maybe someday. I think I'm running out of time, but we'll see. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Ralph.
You're welcome.
We want to thank you. We want to thank you for sharing your knowledge, but even more for sharing your cars with the crowd tomorrow. It's a wonderful thing to bring those out here. Okay, we're going to go to the kind of be-all and end-all of concept cars now, General Motors. This picture here is, the guy on the right is Harley Earl. And he had a rather fascinating background. First of all, as you can see from the picture, he's 6'4". He is there with Harlow Curtis, who was the president of General Motors at the time. And every president of General Motors loved Harley because he could design cars that would sell. His background was interesting. His father was a coach builder, that is to say, coaches that were drawn by horses. And it was not uncommon all around the world at the beginning of the automobile for coach builders to transition into building bodies for cars. However, they were in Los Angeles, and as the movie industry moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles, he also did a lot of the wagons and stagecoaches and things like that for movies. Earl went to Stanford for a little while, and then came back and worked for his father as a chief designer. Then they were bought out by another body shop, whatever you want to call a coach builder, which was owned by Don Lee, who owned the Cadillac distributorship for the West Coast and also the Mutual Radio feed for the West Coast. And when they bought him, they made Earl the chief designer again. And so now Earl is basically hobnobbing with all the Hollywood folks who want custom cars by Harley Earl, by the way. And so he was on the scene just like he was a movie star. And at 6'4", and he liked pastel suits, two-tone perforated shoes, the usual stuff. He cut quite a swath through the Hollywood gang. For a time, he also used the Cecil DeMille early outfit of Jodhpurs and boots. So anyway, in the 20s, General Motors was more than aware of their work, of his work, because it was done mostly on General Motors bodies. And they brought him back to Detroit, and they created something called the Arts and Colors section. And that was the first Detroit dedicated design group. And so from there, he just went from strength to strength. Alfred P. Sloan, the famous General Motors president, who he and Earl invented planned obsolescence, that is to say, the year-to-year model change. They did some rather amazing things in the car business. So anyway, Earl then gets ensconced at GM, and he starts to turn out stuff fit for Hollywood. In fact, this is a 37 that he designed, which went to the country and western singer and movie star Tex Ritter. So you can see, even within GM, they allowed him to show his flair. Now, this is usually considered in the history books to be the first concept car. I think that might be arguable, but certainly it was the first concept car to make the kind of impression it made. It was called the Y job because we talked about all the X cars before, and Earl didn't want that. He said, every goddamn plane and competitor's car calls it an X, the Y job. So as you can see, this thing has got stuff, the wraparound bumpers, the gun sight hood ornament, and if you could see the grille, it has the waterfall grille that still persists in Buick today. And I would be very surprised if Wayne does not have something to say about this car. Very important car. And again, you can see Earl's not diminutive size.
And basically, you know, they had great design. He had such an eye for design, but then to put all this trim on that you see, all this chrome, I mean, that was such a statement also, and to make it a two-seater. And today, still to today, this is one of the coolest cars that GM has ever come out with.
He drove this as his personal car for several years, by the way.
This is the GM Futureliner number 10. Well, this truck matters because it has to do with this country and the future of this country way back in the 30s when we had a major depression going on. It was looking into the future and all exciting technological advances that were taking place at that time. But only a few people knew of these technological advances, and they had to get the word out to the public.
This is a day of days in General Motors. and for 60-some alert young college graduates and veterans of the nation's armed services. For here today at high noon, in front of the GM building in Detroit, GM's brand new Parade of Progress, bigger and better than ever. Behind the gleaming panels of those future liners are wonders to behold. Mechanical, electrical, and chemical exhibits that will amaze, amuse, and entertain millions in the months ahead.
Notice it's called a future liner. And that's because that's exactly what it was. It was looking into the future. And the idea of taking special displays around the country started in the Chicago World's Fair in 1933-34. They had Century of Progress, which was the World's Fair title and theme. And Charles Kettering, who was the chief engineer of GM, was walking around looking at all the displays about future technological events happening in the country. And he finally turned to his staff, says, how do we package this and take it out into the nation? And he created what was called the Parade of Progress. The program was so successful that they decided to expand it, and they created 12 future liners. After World War II, all the future liners were brought into the GM shops, and they basically updated them. They put new drive lines in them, and number 10 future liner was one of those.
Here it comes, the Parade of Progress. Now on nationwide tour, this colossal caravan of 44 vehicles, including 12 specially designed future liners, carries the big show and its personnel from city to city to give a better appreciation of the vital role of science in the American way of life.
The show attracted millions of people. It had advanced publicity in every town, and it was free, and it was quite a spectacle to see these 40 red trucks and cars.
Soon the future liners are opened up and the different exhibits made ready for the show. The many dramatic demonstrations and mechanical exhibits, such as these now being set up, are designed to prove that American genius is still very much alive, and to start American youth thinking.
Well, they would smile, and they were looked at like they in awe, like they just couldn't believe, there was such a thing. Nobody ever saw anything that looked like a future liner before.
Each future liner had a different display in it, a different theme. Number 10 future liner had two major displays. The first display was the Soapbox Derby. The other display was the Fisher-Body Craftsman's Guild display. Now this display was geared toward designing future automobiles. Some of the other displays included cutaway jet engine. One had a modern living room with a working TV.
In this golden age of progress, the past is but prelude. And it is our hope that somewhere we have set a boy to dreaming and set him on a road of usefulness and service to himself and his fellow men and his country.
The 12 future liners were built in the late 30s, early 40s. The chassis drive line was built in the GMC truck and bus coach plant up in Pontiac, Michigan.
The future liner tires are truck size. The unique thing about them is the future liner has 8 wheels.
But it also has dual front steering wheels. And each of those front wheels has its own set of bearings, has its own set of brake shoes.
I don't know of any other vehicle that has ever been put out that had that type of dual front wheels.
Future liner has some other unique features too. It has big 16-foot doors. Each side has an upper door and a lower door.
The future liners were opened up both sides. The top half of the side lifted up as a marquee, and the bottom dropped down as a stage. When you open the door and go up a spiral stairway into the cab of the future liner, you lift the armor plate steps up to check the oil in the engine, which was right under there. The seat was in the middle of the cab, not on the left side. A top that raises hydraulically about 6 feet high with a bank of fluorescent lighting tubes. Those were used to light the show and still used for that.
One of the forecasts of future technology was the television. And by 1956, people were getting the televisions in their homes, and they were spending less time going out to a fairground to see a special display like the future liners arriving.
The attendance kept dropping and dropping, and they just thought that it's not worthwhile to continue.
And after 1956, GM started disposing of the future liners. Two were given to the state police, and they used them as safety vehicles in the state of Michigan, and others were sold to dealerships as rolling advertisements. A lot of them ended up in junkyards. Fortunately, one person in Chicago decided to start collecting a few of them. His name was Joe Bortz, and later he donated number 10 to the National Automotive Truck Museum of the United States, which is located in Auburn, Indiana. Well, the museum, like most museums, didn't have the money to restore it, but they did put it in their backyard, hopefully someday finding the means to restore it. Well, over time, I got the people together and we started restoring it. It was a great experience because it's a very unusual vehicle. It sort of took over my life for a few years. As we started the restoration, we started with just a couple of people. Old car people would hear about the project, and they would drop by to see what was going on. And the next thing you know, they would have a wrench in their hand. We wanted it to be fun. And as we went along, the expertise that we needed showed up. And it was a fun job because not only were we restoring a historic vehicle, we were learning its history at the very same time. Well, the whole project took 7 years. We were at a show in Canada, and one of the ladies, she observed a man walking up, stopping, looking, shaking his head, and walking away. He did it 3 times in about 4 hours. And finally, she got up enough nerve to say, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm trying to figure out where I saw this as a kid." And then finally, the light came on to him. And he remembered as a little kid, his dad taking him there. I am Don Mayton, and this truck matters.
These are future liners. It was spelled F-U-T-U-R liner. They left the E out because they thought that they might be able to patent the name easier. Now, what these were, and Howard, do you want to comment to this?
I'm just one of the volunteers. Not really supposed to be up here, but I'm here. Number one, I want to thank you people for bringing us here and all the sponsors and stuff. And you must have a photographic mind or memory or something over here. How do you remember all that stuff?
Oh, I don't know. 76 years of booze and drugs, I guess.
The video showed quite a bit and is better at it than I am, but they come out in, I think, 1940, or they built in 1939, come out in 1940, run for about a year till the war broke out, and they mothballed them till 52, redesigned them, and run from 53 to 56. As far as the restoration, it was been a very interesting project. The women were involved as much as the men. The women would fix us some pretty good meals, and also some of the women done a lot of the polishing of the letters and the chrome and stuff you see on this thing. My job was a welder. I done and the gopher. Everybody pitched in. There was anywhere from 15 to 2 dozen people every Tuesday. We'd take the summers off because everybody had old cars. And it was just one heck of a project. There was a time when a group of the paraders that traveled with them showed up when we was restoring this thing. You talk about tearjerker, that was it. I'm not sure what all else I can add to it other than it's...
We'll take it from here, Howard. Well, what happened was the General Motors had these two what would you call them, extravaganzas. One was called the Parade of Progress. The other was called the Motorama. This was basically a moving show that would be taken around the country. As you will see the future liner on the field tomorrow, these buses had a light bar in the top so that if they went into an area that did not have lighting and wanted to do a nighttime show, they were able to provide their own illumination. But as the movie showed, and we are going to play the movie again when we're done here, but as the movie showed, they would open up the sides, and the sides would have these displays. The display on this one is jet air power. And as you can see on the left side, there's a group of airplanes, and on the right and the bottom, there is a jet engine. And all the displays had to do with modern technology. They had one that, for instance, explained how electric traffic lights worked, because this was not, this was a new thing. And anyway, so these were incredible shows. They went to hundreds of cities, and they would caravan these beautiful buses, Harley Earl design, by the way. And I think you will agree it is as good a Art Deco four-wheeled vehicle design as came out of anywhere. They would sometimes be displayed with the passenger car line, often be displayed also with the passenger car line plus some concept cars. This is a Oldsmobile F88. You can see the model. I mean, you get the feeling for the whole deal, and it was a fantastic show. And it really, I think you'd have to say this was the golden age of concept cars. Not just because of GM, but you've seen the other offerings. I think as we go through the General Motors stuff, you'll have to agree that pretty stunning.
We sell some stuff out here called Miracle at Beaver Dam, because just different things come along at the right time to put this all together. And this one's about the only one that's got pretty well back to original. This is the one that brought them out of the woodwork. You take a look at the thing tomorrow. It's got all original hubcaps. One of the hubcaps was crushed. It was up on Connecticut, but one of our body guys tapped it out. And you take a good look, you'll see it, but otherwise it's cool.
How many of these are remaining?
I think there's about 5. It's actually kind of on the road, or there's one in Sweden now being restored. We were 4 years trying to get Coker to make them white walls, and they didn't do it. So we had a guy in my hometown of Muskegon, Michigan, vulcanize on those donuts. The one that sold at Barrett Jackson a few years ago contacted us, where'd you get the white walls? I think he made some for him, but then I said, no, they got an original tire with a raised lettering, Parade of Progress. And they said, yeah, but Coker wants $35,000 for the mold, and we ain't got that kind of money. This is all donations and volunteers. And anyhow, we sent the tire to Coker. He said, no problem. Sent it to Coker. He got permission to get some tires done, and donated 10 to us, paid for everything. So that Ron Pratt done that out there. It's just one of them things that come along at the right time. But yeah, check our video and stuff. Whatever you buy out there will help support the project. It's owned by a museum. We work for nothing, and we got double on overtime. So you know how that goes. One other thing I might say, seeing we're from Michigan, and my partner there is a Tigers fan. When they come to Kansas City, help us out, will you, please? They're kind of going downhill this year. Gotta get that.
So this is a 51.
One other thing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can you imagine driving down the street and seeing these buses come at you? And I don't know if you've ever seen one, but the driver sits up on like the top level and drives it. I mean, it's just one of the coolest things. I always wanted one of these. So
You look good in there.
yeah, well, but what happened to me is sort of like wanting a Boss 302 Mustang and getting a Pinto. So I got a BMC bus, and it's not quite a future liner, but it still is a bus.
He's trying to sell it, so don't. Yeah, that's what he's trying to do.
It's a great bus, really.
Oh,
Looking
it's a
for
beautiful
offers.
bus. Yeah, it's beautiful.
You guys probably saw it on the show and said, "What is that idiot doing?" That's because of future liner.
This bus you have to see in person. I mean, it is so aerodynamic. It's so massive. It's like about the prettiest, beautiful woman you ever saw, but she's wearing a size 44. But it's just, This truck is really, I love trucks. This truck is really, that's the epitome of styling and the interior and thought and the white walls. And it's just really cool. It's really an experience to see this truck.
We encourage people to go up in it, especially like the little guy in the green hat. We want to, encourage young people to get involved. And you're 9 feet above the ground. You can't see the first 15 or 20 feet in front of you. The rear view mirrors are beautiful, but they're useless. And but they travel in a caravan. I think they had to travel about 50 feet apart because at the time they didn't have good brakes and they'd run into each other. This one does have air brakes on it now, and I think they upgraded that in the 50s, air conditioning.
12. 2 are gone forever. I'm not sure the state of all the other 10.
One was just for sale not too long ago. I don't know where
Yeah,
it
it
was at.
sold for what Pratt sell that for? $4 million? $4 million in January at Barrett Jackson. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Joe Bortz owned 8 of them at one time, and he donated this to the National Auto and Truck Museum. They own it. We have a little say-so about it, but they own it, and they can finally get it inside their museum. They didn't have a door big enough, and the floor wasn't supported good enough. So I think it'll be in Auburn Labor Day. It'll be in the museum for the winter.
I don't know what the estimate was, and to be honest, I don't know if it even sold.
The guy that sold it first, he was hoping to get $600,000 for it. And yeah.
Well, that's I hope they went out to dinner that night. I mean,
No, we got a lot of parts from that one that sold. It used to be the Fido future liner up in Canada. The windshield we got from him, I guess only out of 12 that he had to have made for his, only 3 of them didn't break, and we got the last one, $10,000. All donations.
okay, well, we're going to move along to the rest of the GM stuff. The caterer has told us that if we don't get out of here by 3, we're not going to be served dinner tonight. However, if we run beyond that and people want to chat, there's a patio outside with seating and umbrellas and everything. So anyway, here's a typical 50s GM dream car. This is called a Buick XP 300. I'm sorry, and but the point is that GM did not only have design capability, but they had incredible engineering capability because traditionally an engineer had often been president of the company. This car is built like a 50s European race car. It has a de Dion rear end. It has inboard brakes at the rear. The transmission has been moved from behind the engine to the rear axle for better weight distribution. I mean, this is just an incredibly sophisticated car for the day. And the styling on this one is not one of their greatest efforts, but you can see it's streets ahead of some of the stuff we've seen. Now, this was Harley Earl's other great car, the LeSabre. It's a Buick. You can see the airplane influence on the back, and this is probably after the Y job or with the Y job, one of the 2 most famous concept cars ever. And again, he used this for his private car for several years as well. And this is just an unbelievable tour de force. You can see the air intake. It turns around, and that's where the headlights are. And you can see the Dagmar bumpers, so named because of a well-endowed TV actress of the day. And just all the great stuff, the spear running along into the valance spear. It's just in the wraparound windshield, of course, which was one of their innovations. What did I leave out, Wayne?
Supercharged.
Supercharged. That's, well, again, this has the same mechanicals as that XP300. So these were not something where they took a production chassis and cut it up. This stuff was made practically from scratch. And go ahead.
And I think that's something that we talked about with Ford designing cars. And even to this day, Ford designs cars and they sell them sometimes at auction. RM sold them a little while ago, but they're not runners. They're not real driving cars. And that was something that GM made sure that they did. They made these cars so that they ran. Harley Earl drove it. They were innovative not only in their design, but in their mechanics also. They started experimenting with different things. So what was under the hood was also as much as important as the design of the car.
Pictures don't do this car any justice. I've seen this car several times. It's just,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal.
It's stunning.
It's just phenomenal. I mean, the workmanship. Wayne and I own a car called a Spone, and it's designed after this car with the fins and the Cyclops center, and it's just, you have to see this car in person, sit in it and touch it and feel it, because we were so innovative in these times. Right now we let it all go, but I mean, nothing compares with anything like this. It's just
Somehow the Spawn though doesn't come up to this level.
Yeah,
The Spawn is, I think, probably pretty ugly car, but
yeah, but it's got
it
the
does
same
have a lot
talent.
of the design
Yeah,
cues of
it
this
does.
car.
It does.
This is a 53 Cadillac Le Mans, made for the 50th anniversary of General Motors. And 4 of these were made. One survives. One of them was stolen from a dealer in the day. Never. So technically, it's a barn find, waiting to happen, but nobody's found it yet. But you can see many of the design features, the wraparound windshield, again, the Cadillac fins, the chrome, not on this one as bad as others put on with a trowel, but fantastic car. And notice the sporting feel. Again, America, with the exception of the Corvette, was not making any two-seaters, and that was a very romantic concept in the day. This is the old F-88. This is actually a warmed-over Corvette, but the Oldsmobile put one of their rocket V8s in it, and then redid the styling with the bullet tail lights and the trim on the rear valance. Again, the styling cues of the day, the wraparound windshield.
That car really made a statement. Bear Jackson a few years ago, it sold for over $3 million, and it set everyone on their ear as far as concept cars go. And that started the whole revolution of people wanting to buy and own a concept car, I believe. And GM back in the day, now I believe this car was owned by Joe Bortz, and Joe is very instrumental in saving these cars. Warhoops junkyard out in Detroit was given the task of destroying these cars by General Motors. And so they would bring the car to Warhoops, and Warhoops was supposed to crush them or cut them up so that no one would ever see the car again and never be able to do anything with it. And they sent one of their representatives to the junkyard to watch this process happen. I think the guys at Warhoops probably took the guy out for a beer at lunchtime and drove the car in the backyard and just told him it was crushed, because fortunately a few of these things were saved because they had the foresight as to not destroying the cars. A few of these cars, like Joe Bortz's Biscayne, were actually cut in half. And the minute that the gentleman saw the car being cut in half, he got in his car and left. But they put the 2 halves in the backyard, and later on they were all found. So kind of a really cool car and cool story.
Another tour de force, the Buick Wildcat 2. You can see the unusual headlight treatment, the cutaway fenders like a 1958 Ferrari Testarossa, wraparound windshield. Just a beautiful concept. Again, 2-seater to try and give the rest of the line that sporting image. This is a Pontiac Bonneville Special. Again, this was a Ron Pratt car that was sold at the same time in January as the Futureliner. And you really get into the, rocket ship look here. the canopy, that's actually a spare there. It's not meant to be an exhaust, but this is a pretty sporting looking thing, and it's also very good from the front. This is an incredible car. You can get the scale of it. This is called a Pontiac Club de Mer. You can get the scale of it from the model, but this thing had a 350 horsepower V8 in it. So this thing had some scat. You've got the little upright wing on the back, kind of like a D-type Jaguar. You've got the chrome striping, which became used on many Pontiacs and some of the other GM cars. And again, very sporting, not building anything like it. I mean, the Corvette was very different than this. And just a very nice, clean, despite all the chrome design. This is a Buick Centurion, fiberglass rear TV camera. You can see the inventive use of the windscreen and the top. And what is the fenders? Obviously, we saw later on later Buicks.
What was really cool is a few years ago at Pebble Beach, what was it, Ralph, about 5 years ago, these were all together.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable to see all these cars in one spot, all General Motors concept cars.
Including a Future Liner, not ours, but
Yeah.
a different Ron Pratt's. And you could go up on the top of the Future Liner, and I don't think I've ever seen the Pebble Show Field like that. It was just
Yeah,
amazing.
to have
with
all these cars in one spot.
all
it
these
was
GM
unbelievable.
cars, and you've got this elevation, and you got Stillwater Cove in the background, and it ain't all bad.
If you looked at that car, and anybody that's owned a 61 Chevy bubble top, you'll see that's the windshield that was on that bubble top. If you look at it, if you look at the front, the grille is indented a little bit, but if you stare at it long enough, it looks like a 61 or 62 Corvette. So they used a lot of stuff off this car as they went on. So pretty neat.
Now, we talked about Harley Earl and how colorful he was. Earl stayed on until 59 when he did the 60 models, and then he retired. The person who replaced him was Bill Mitchell. This is Bill Mitchell. And Bill Mitchell had an equal design and personal flair as Harley did. So it was a perfect match and almost a seamless transition. Bill was younger. Bill had a young design staff. A lot of people, Larry Shinoda, Pete Brock, anyway, guys that did not want to put on the chrome with the trowel, and some wonderful designs resulted from that. This is a a Corvair Monza SS. This one, you can see the styling in the Corvette C3, things like the knockoff aluminum wheels, and the Targa type wing on the back behind the cockpit. You can see that the windshield is not something that could be used every day. Again, the same story, sporting halo effect, and just a really nice design.
Ralph never saw this picture, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, this is very interesting because this particular car has the Corvair engine behind the axle design, rear axle design. That was partially to make more room for seating. I'm sorry, my mistake. The previous car had the engine ahead of the axle. This car, which is a Corvette Monza, had the traditional Corvair of hanging it out from the rear, behind the rear axle. Again, you can see all the same styling cues. Front end is almost straight C3 Corvette, and just beautifully clean design. Notice very little, if any, chrome accenting. The highlights are either air inlets of some kind or the louvers. And this car also had a slatted rear window like the Italians had had. But lovely little car. Both these cars obviously suffered, never got anywhere near production because of Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which questioned the stability of Corvairs. This was one of Mitchell's greats, the Firebird. There was a 1, 2, and 3. This is number 2. Picture's actually taken at Pebble the year that they were all there. You can see the future liner in the back. And this car is interesting in that it was a 4-seater and turbine and worked. And interesting to think they would present this as a family car of the future, but they did. As we know, turbines have just never gotten any traction, and don't know if they ever will. This is the Aerovet. This is one of the most important Corvettes ever made. This was originally a concept that used 2 rotary engines geared together, and it went through some slight styling changes. But in the end, it ended up with a 400 cubic inch Corvette motor, V8, and it was slated for production in 1980. Unfortunately, the champions of the car, Zora Duntov, who was the chief Corvette engineer, Bill Mitchell, chief stylist, and who was the third? Well, Ed Cole, who was president of General Motors and was an engineer. They all retired within a year and a half, and the new Corvette chief designer, Dave McClellan, decided that the Corvette would remain a front engine car, which it does till this day. However, since this car was shown, there has never been a month that some car magazine did not have an article about the upcoming rear engine Corvette. You'd agree on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's something that we've all wanted for so long, and I believe that someday that it'll be maybe Cadillac powered, that mid-engine car, and we're in the midst of trying to put that together, a couple of guys and myself. So hopefully we'll have something like that out in the future.
Then we go on to what's called the Cadillac Art and Science design. This is the Cadillac CN. It's got a mid-engine 7.5 liter V12. Very clean design, very lovely concept. Don't think that it was something that will ever reach production. This is actually a 2002 car. And another 2002 car is the Cadillac 16. This was something Cadillac probably should have built to, take on the S-Class Mercedes and the 7-Class BM and 7 Series BM, et cetera. This one has a 1,000 horsepower V16 in it. And as you can see, it's a lovely looking piece.
What's really cool is you see this is in 2002, and we're seeing this type of styling in our Cadillacs of today, very edgy, and the headlights look exactly the same, the grille. So concept cars are brought, all the design cues are brought into the future, and Cadillacs look very similar to this today.
I've seen this car in person. It's unbelievable. The interior of this car is just to die for. I can't believe GM had all these great designs and never went forward with them. I guess timing and money, I guess. I don't know. Management. But that car is, I can't believe they didn't put that car out there. It would have been phenomenal. It would have been ahead of its time. Just like the Elante. They got it right, and then they discontinued it. And then the economy went up. GM had no convertibles. I mean, sometimes you wonder where their heads are. But that particular car, you really had to see that. The interior, I've seen a lot of interiors and sat in a lot of cars and designed a lot of cars, but that car was really cool.
Yeah, way cool car. But General Motors has not lost their touch. This is a car that was designed to have some kind of air turbine engine. If you remember the racing days of the Chaparrals, you can see that this is white. It has number 66 on it, which was Jim Hall's number. And this car was designed, inspired by a flying suit. If you know the things I'm talking about, where guys jump off mountains and they look like a flying squirrel. That was the inspiration for this car, and they know how to go after the kids. This car is featured in the game Gran Turismo as one of the cars. And so Cadillac, GM, obviously still on top of the whole concept styling situation. And that is the end of our concept presentation. We would like some audience participation, question and answer with the guests. And if anybody wants to ask a question, please come up to the microphone here.
It should have been called Rocky, that car.
Yeah.
Rocky the Flying Squirrel.
I don't think this one's
I thought it might be helpful if you knew why I was sitting here.
Take care of the mics.
Can I add that
I'm not one of these legends. They do all the work, and they know an awful lot more about this subject than I will know. But I'm the president of the Kansas City Art Institute, and so we teach, of course, things like sculpture and design, and all of those play directly into vehicle design. But my life is actually at the other end of what you will see here. Tomorrow on the lawn here, our village green, you'll see 200 absolutely incredible examples of automotive art and design. And you'll also see the concept cars that have been so brilliantly described and collected and restored by our guests on the panel. But I'm at the other end of this. These are dream cars. My life has been involved in the dream before the dream. Concept cars don't just appear. People don't go into studios at General Motors or Ford or Rolls-Royce with a big lump of clay and start modeling that clay and produce a concept car. It doesn't work that way. Designers are driven and are given direction by the companies that commission the work. There's an enormous amount of research work that goes into the idea of creating a concept car, because the concept is not delivered by the designer, it's delivered by the company. And their analysis will indicate why there is a need for a particular type of car. So it's not just design, it's actually a kind of sociology as well. So this came clear to me when I was 9 years old, and when I truly became a car guy. This is a slightly risque story, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My brother, who is much older than I am, and is quite a ladies' man, bought an MGTD convertible with a soft top. We were living in Wales and Scotland, where it is either raining, about to rain, or has just finished raining. Why he bought this car was a complete mystery to me. So I asked him one day, where do you go with this car at weekend? And he said, this is good, stereo. I said, why did you buy this car? And you go off for weekends. He said, well, I bought it because it's a very beautiful car. And because any girl that I want to go out with will go out with me to go for a drive in this car. I thought, well, this is interesting. It's not just about transportation. It's about literally picking up girls. And I said, well, what do you do with these? They fixed this lot. Okay, I'll do it with this one. So I said to my brother, what do you do? And he said, well, we go off for weekends together. I said, where do you go? He said, well, we go to the mountains, or we go to the beach or something like that. And I said to my brother, thinking about the design of the MG that he'd bought, I said, doesn't have very much room for a suitcase. And my brother said, lingerie doesn't take up a lot of room. But remember, I was 9. So I said to my brother, David, what's lingerie? My brother is really short of words, but he stopped and just looked at me and said, give it 10 years, Anthony, and you'll know. I came to realize that actually it was all about sociology. This was not just about the car. It was about all the things that went to the car. And so years and years later, when I took over as president of the Royal College of Art and Design in London, which has the #1 vehicle design program in the world, I found that the car design work that we were doing was more about sociology than it was about body work. And this is really important because concept cars, as you've seen them, were designed in a particular culture. A concept car that is designed today is analyzed very carefully for a market and is designed in an entirely different way. So it is not just about the shape and the scale. It's about an awful lot of other things. Royal College's design program is extraordinary. So if you have driven a Rolls-Royce or a Kia or a Bentley or a Jaguar or a Toyota or a Land Rover or a Hyundai or anything made for Ford Europe or a Saab or a Volvo or a McLaren, or if you've been on the new double-decker bus in London, you've driven something that came out of that program, including the new Aston Martin, which will appear in the next James Bond film. The sociology of this is really important because it's going to indicate what you're going to drive. Now, those of you at the back won't be able to see this, but this is a little schematic. This is a cross, and at the top it says 20, 20, 20, 20, and at the bottom it says 55 and 65. This is an analysis that is critically important to the motor industry and, in fact, all design industries in the entire world. In the year 2020, 55% of the entire population of Europe will be over the age of 65. 55% over the age of 65. What happens to the human being at the age of 65? What has happened to us? Many of us are over 65. You start losing your ability to grip. So you start getting osteoarthritis. Your hearing becomes a problem, your eyesight. Yeah.
Speak
Yeah.
up.
What did you say? What did you say? What did you say? I can't see you either. What happens is that we're slowly having deterioration of our senses. And so Ford came to us and said that they were working on some planning for cars, but this was an interesting re-engineering. It wasn't that we would design a new concept car, it's that we would take an existing car and reconceptualize it specifically for people who were getting older. The reason for this is that analysis in UK indicated that when men and women retired at the age of 65, which is the law in our country at that time, they nearly all did one thing. They bought a new car. And they bought it because it was literally going to drive them through their retirement. And they wanted a car that was simple, effective, inefficient, cheap to insure, reliable, and which they could use for multiple purposes, like taking the grandchildren out. The amount of money spent on buying that retirement car was enormous. But that car was exactly the same car that you would buy if you were 25, not 65 or 75. We did a sociological analysis of the needs of a car for a person who's over the age of 65. And we did some classic testing. The average age of a student entering that program at the Royal College of Art is 28. These are not undergraduate kids. These are serious, thoughtful people who have worked in the world of design and engineering and have gone to that program. And when they got in there they are, healthy boys and girls at the age of 28. Well, we de-healthified them. We put earplugs in them. We gave them blinders. We put gloves on them to make their touch more difficult. Then we put the cars and said, okay, now tune the radio with thick gloves on. They couldn't do that. Now try to read the gauges. Now drive around at high speed, if possible, on a skid pan, and try to do all of these things. And we redesigned the entire interior of the car. Pop-up seats that lifted you out of the car and then lifted you into the car. Slide-away steering wheels like you used to have on the old American Thunderbirds. We used fighter technology to do projections on the windscreen. Voice recognition software so you could turn the radio up and down by telling it what to do. We spent a huge amount of time on re-engineering the inside of an existing car which is known as a Ford Mondeo. And what Ford came up with in their analysis of the sale of that re-engineered car was that it was worthwhile doing this because enough people in the UK at retirement age would buy a special edition of the Mondeo, one that was designed specifically for people who had all of these increasing disabilities as they were going through. We wanted to call it the silver edition, you know, right? Ford called it the wrinkly. The wrinkly. Wrinkles. That enormous amount of time and effort has actually led into many of the things that you will now see in contemporary Fords, but also in Cadillacs, in General Motors cars, in every car manufacturer in the world is looking at tuning the way a concept design is now tuned toward a special population. It's what's called in the automotive industry small batch production. So instead of producing 500,000, they only produce maybe 100,000, but they are tuned uniquely to an audience. That's a concept car, but it's completely different from what you're seeing here. When I got to the Royal College, computers were really quite new. In 1990, the internet hadn't really got the traction it had at the moment. Satellite communications were really very expensive still. But we were asked if we would look at the sociology and the design of a particular type of car. A car manufacturing company said that they thought there was a segment in the market for an extremely beautiful, incredibly well-engineered two-door roadster, rather like my brother, but with an actual boot, an actual trunk, so that you could put a suitcase into it. And that this was going to be a revolutionary road car, and it was going to look like nothing else and would be absolutely incredible. So this is what happened. For those of you who are technologically smart, think back to 1990. We went into the studio with the students, and we said, well, first of all, you're not allowed to pick up a pencil. You can't draw this car. Instead, you must work entirely with an electronic pencil, and you must design using a computer on screen. When you have a general sense of what this car is going to do, then you could begin to do a wireframe, and then you can clad the wireframe with a panel. And we used an exclusively American system. There's a computer system that was designed only for car manufacture by a company called Evans and Sutherland. That company produced this software specifically so we could do that kind of modeling. When we had finished doing all of that, we beamed it to the manufacturing company using a satellite link. This was a big deal. Everybody was in the room to see somebody push the button. The message went up, it went to the manufacturer, and then we watched another first on closed-circuit television while a multi-headed tool took a piece of thick plastic and actually made the model of the car. They photographed it with a 3D camera, beamed it back to us in London, where we then made it on our own multi-headed tool. In 1990, there were no 3D printers. There was no rapid prototyping. This was a mixture of hand skill done with machines. We fiddled around with it, we scanned it, we played with it, we turned it upside down, we rescaled, etc. And then we drew 5 little rings on the back and 5 little rings on the front. And what we had produced was the Audi TT. Within 4 years, you could buy that car and it was on the road. So this is a mixture of a concept car that comes out of the sociology of a changing population, aging populations, and concept cars that come out of the idea that there's a missing segment in the market for a very special kind of car. So my life as a car guy has been at the other end of what you're going to see on the field. You have 200 cars that were all dreams, and you have special concept cars, which are truly dream cars. I've worked in the world that begins to look at the dream before the dream.
Thank you, Tony. Do we have some public questions for these legends up here?
Before you get into that, can I add that you had Bill Mitchell up there, and Don Mayton, prior to the Futureliner, had a Bill Mitchell car, 1956 Buick X.
Yeah.
They're restoring it now. It was put on the back burner when this come along, but they're restoring it now. So if you got any pictures or information, he would love to have it.
I'm assuming he's been in touch with Joe Bortz.
Joe Bortz has been in touch with him. Yes,
Okay.
he'd like to have it.
Yeah,
Just step up.
sounds familiar. No questions? I mean, oh, here you go. Come on. Thank you.
I know they keep that stuff tightly guarded. Do they put them in museums generally, or do they try and destroy them still?
Well, GM has something called the GM Heritage Center, and I think if they thought the car was important enough, it would end up in there. However, the bad side is with the lawyer situation, what it is today, my guess is they just don't want the liability. But I don't know. Do any of you guys have any
We,
idea?
we had the Future Liner at Milford, Michigan at the GM Proving Grounds last year. Some of us got to go on the proving grounds, which I guess is pretty rare. But you could see the Corvettes and the different trucks out there and stuff. And the guy told us all about them. And I said, well, what do they do with them? And he said, they crush them all because of liability in the past. I guess they had a lawsuit, but Corvettes and trucks,
I also had a question for Wayne. I was kind of curious what your process is of researching certain vehicles. Obviously, you have a lot of contacts in the industry. There's the internet, which is helpful today. But when you're tracking down vehicles, what is the process that you go through? I mean, back in the day, it was possible to go to the DMV with a VIN number or previous owner and get information, which they don't allow anymore. What do you do when you're looking
About a
for something?
particular car, you mean, or just the
Yeah, a
car in
particular
general?
car, you know,
Just
something that's been off the road for a long time. It's kind of lost to the public. Like, what is the process that you go through in researching?
talking to people and just trying to find out who owned it before.
Mainly just your contacts.
That's it. You'll see on one of the episodes that's coming up. We just bought a great car that was parked in 1931, and it was left for all those years in this barn. And luckily, the person I bought it from was the caretaker of the property, and he told me the whole story of the car. And not having the person there to actually tell you the story that owned the car, you sort of think about it and you go, well, it could be. We got the car back to our shop, took the seat out of the car, and everything under the seat, there was all little clues under the seat, like a business card and a map showing the paved roads that went from New York down to Savannah, Georgia, because he told us how the guy was a general in the Army and how he'd bought the car in Boston, and sure enough, there was a bag that said Stutz of Boston on it. I mean, there was so many clues like that. So it's like a piece of a puzzle. You're a forensic scientist really putting pieces of the puzzle together, and that's what makes it so interesting.
You're a forensic scientist now?
Yeah, well,
Was that basically always the process that you went through? I mean, obviously with your status today, a lot more people know of you. You've built a name in the industry, but like earlier on, was that still the process that you went
Sure.
through?
Yeah. I learned that from my father, and listened and really pay attention to a lot of things that people are telling you. Cars are about people, and the people are the most important part of collecting cars. So listening to their stories and putting pieces of the puzzle together like that, that's the really cool deal. It's very forensic.
Well, first of all,
Getting back to one thing. About 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to General Motors, and they had these 5 Quonset huts that nobody's been in for years. They had cars in there that I couldn't believe were there. They had spy things too, like they had a Chevy Impala with a BMW engine, and they would drive this, and they would see how BMW did this and how they did that. And if you saw the car, you thought it was an Impala. You never knew that it had a BMW driveline. And they had 2 Quonset huts full of wheels that they never used, and the designs. And the stuff that they had in there it was just mind-boggling what they had. They had these trucks that they designed that nobody's ever seen. They had different engines that were put in different cars. Because years ago, Oldsmobile used to be their cutting edge. They would, like when the Tornado came out front-wheel drive, that was the first car that came out, and then everything, the next year, GM had it and everything. Oldsmobile come out with this one year, and then the rest of the GM cars. They had all those cars in there, and all the designs and all the patterns. They had special mechanics that would work on these cars, and cars that were taped that you didn't know what they were, and they drove around. I remember years ago, I used to go to the Meadowbrook show out in Michigan, and in the hotel that we stayed, all these cars were there. They had tape around them, and they would be driving them. And it was just really cool. But GM, I don't know where they dropped the ball, but boy, they had some stuff in there they had a Buick, a Burgundy Buick, I forget what they called it. And they had that V16, that Cadillac in there. And I sat in it and looked at it. And I said, man, I said to the guy, excuse the language, I says, when you guys going to get your head out of your ass? I mean, you got stuff there. They had Saturns in there. This is when the Saturn first came out with pimp wheels and stuff. People that are doing now. I mean, they were so far ahead of it, but they never brought it out. I just can't believe it was just, the Saturns really stuck in my head because they were way ahead. They were 5 years ahead of it. They had it and never did it. They had the Chevy Bel Air convertible. Do you remember they had a burgundy one that they used? They never produced it. And then all of a sudden, Mustang comes out with a convertible, and it was phenomenal. They had it. They were ahead of the time. It was a 5-passenger convertible. They had the name. They had the side piece that looked like a Bel Air, like a 55, but they had the dash, a retro 55 dash in this car. I remember I saw that car. They had it at Amelia Island, I guess, around 10 or 12 years ago. And there when I went into this place, there it was. It was sitting there, and they never made it. It's such a shame that they didn't. They let the Japs and the Koreans go way ahead of us and do all this stuff, but we had it, and we just never did it. It's cuckoo.
This was a treat. Wayne, my husband and I watch your show all the time.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome to see you in person and hear you talk. You too, Ralph. Question for all of you guys. I'm just curious what you think the most innovative and exciting manufacturing company right now is today, and why?
Personally, I think Tesla's something that we all have to pay attention to, and I can't understand why that the manufacturers, Ford and GM, Chrysler, have not been able to do the things that Mr. Musk has done. We have cars now that can supposedly go 400 miles on a charge. That's unbelievable, and he did it in such a short period of time. So as far as innovations go, I think you have to pay attention to Tesla, and he's just at the beginning of his manufacturer and looking to the future. There's so many great things that can happen. So I think the electric car is something we have to pay attention to. Not that we don't want to pay attention to gasoline-powered cars and classic cars and all that, but for the future, Tesla's pretty cool.
And Eldon has acted as a guru to the whole Silicon Valley technical complex. These kids come out of Stanford and Stanford Engineering School, and as you know, they start their own companies. And he has helped all of them. He has passed along his technology for free. And I know personally some people that are making an electric car. It's a sports car. And they're about to do their first delivery. But what they're really doing is they are learning how to source parts from all over the world to make electric cars in the cheapest possible way. And what their plan is when the major manufacturers get to the electric car point, they will have to come to them to get the best package, because technology changes, updates. And I think that will be a very successful company, and I think that it's very typical of what's going on. I did want to comment to your DMV question. As we have seen at the prison in New York, things that are really secure are not that secure. I had a client that wanted there were 3 Mercedes made that were racing Mercedes. And supposedly they were either crushed by Mercedes North America in New Jersey, or they were crushed in South Bend, because that's when Studebaker was handling Mercedes distribution, or they were taken back to Germany and crushed. But nobody's ever been able to find the guy that crushed them. So these 3 cars may still be out there and be barn finds. A client of mine wanted to do it, and I said, well, what do you suggest? He says, well, let's go through the DMV records. I said, oh, you can't get into those. Well, this guy had 2 chauffeurs, a day chauffeur and a night chauffeur. Both of them were retired New York City cops, so they could pack. And I spent several days going through Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey DMV records. So, and I'm nobody. So if somebody, they can get in there and take a look. But well, I don't know whether you've been reading the paper for the last 30 years, but we live in a country where money talks and nobody walks.
I think the big changes are all technological. I agree with Wayne. Are you stealing the microphone again? I'm just going to yell. I think the big changes, I think Wayne is exactly right, is going to be in technology. I think what Musk is doing with Tesla is correct. Energy storage systems, alternative systems like hydrogen, using water, all of those I think are critical. I think more and more space space age, literally space age exploration is going to come from the space program and will be applied to what we're doing. And I think on the engineering side, instead of making cars, growing them. There are serious experiments going on about making chassis out of cartilage. And you would do that from stem cell technology from whales and large boned animals like oxes and cows. The cartilage that you have in your nose is an extraordinary material. If you could engineer the manufacture of this, you would have a space frame within a car that is rigid, incredibly strong, easily repaired, flexible, and protects the occupant of the vehicle in ways that metal cannot. So there's a lot of bioengineering crossing into electronics, crossing into space age, all of that kind of activity coming together. There is a real sense among car designers at the moment that we're at a tipping point, that they're through Musk, for example, and the Tesla technology, there's something coming. Something within the next 5 to 10 years is going to be dramatically different. And what we drive 10 years from now, what we drive in the future, is actually going to come from a very significant technological change. And we're right at the tipping point of that change.
Marshall, if people want to continue to chat, can we go out on the terrace?
Yeah, please. It's really a beautiful day. It's beautiful outside. We have to be out of this room so this can be broken down and redone again. So I want to thank all of our panelists.
And
I think this has been, as many of you have heard me say before, Michael Lynch has forgotten more than almost anybody knows about the motor vehicle industry and the history of the motor vehicle industry. Tom Strongman from Kansas City, what a wonderful job of helping Michael put all of this together, and these wonderful panelists. Again, thank you all very much.
We're all going to be
Go
outside. So if you want to chat with us outside, we're available.
And the future liners should be arriving about now.